I'm Mary Mason, and this is my third podcast of Mary's Road Stories, brought to you from Connections House. Well, I think you might want to hear how I wound up designing John Lee Hooker's home studio, because it turned out to be a rather interesting tour. See, John Lee had just moved to Blind Pig Records, and so Blind Pig wanted to find him the perfect studio. And they'd spent several months doing it. They'd hit Muscle Shoals. They'd hit Studio A in New York. They'd hit L.A. They'd hit St. Louis, New Orleans, Seattle, London. No, this ain't right. It don't sound like the blues. Studio after studio after studio, things done by every blues artist. It doesn't sound like the blues. So he shows up in Oakland where his daughter Zakiya Hooker, if you get a chance to see her, she's as talented as her dad. Wonderful, wonderful blues artist in her own right. So Zakiya has a house, a little ways up from the AME church, just far enough you can barely hear the choir on Sunday morning. And it has a big old garage, big old separate garage. And she wants to turn that into a studio for her dad. So her dad had come in and see Nick Gravenitis. You've seen my previous cast, then you've heard about Nick. Well, John Lee Hooker would come to play with Nick. And so Zakiya was telling me about her studio. I said, well, there's a few things you're going to have to do if you're going to do one for John Lee. And I started to tell her what I would do. And she said, would you come in and look at the building and tell me what you think? And I wound up with her and her husband and their family, and in this old 1950s wooden garage. And we were supposed to turn that into a recording studio. Now, they'd bought a bunch of equipment. Yeah, they'd been sold a bunch of equipment. Most of it was pretty good and was usable. But equipment doesn't make the kind of studio John Lee Hooker wanted. He wanted not a place where in post-production you could use effects to make it sound like the blues. He wanted a place that when he sat in the middle of it and he was playing his music, it sounded like the blues. And that's something very different. And he didn't want to do it in a nightclub. He'd been there with that live record and all those bottles and no, didn't want that stuff. He wanted a studio. And he knew that there could be one. So I went to figure out what it was. Now, how do you figure out what sounds like the blues to a 60-year-old blues man? I grabbed every record of his I could find. I grabbed things with violins on them done in the 50s. I grabbed basically acoustic things done by folk recordings. I grabbed every recording I could. And one place, one series of recordings and all of that, you could hear him smile. Oh, you say, yeah, right, you can hear it. You can't, because when someone smiles, they tighten their soft palate, and their voice actually does change. You may have noticed that when I stopped smiling, my voice changed. Everyone's does. Learning how to smile a little bit and still sing on pitch is a whole thing in stage linging. Well, I went back and I listened through all these legends, and one place there was where he sounded happy, where he smiled. And that was the old Chess Studios in Chicago. Now, What do we know about the old Chess Studios? They weren't built as a studio. They took an old church, a big old shoebox sanctified church, had a choir loft way in the back. And you can hear when he'd be singing, and then he'd lift his face and he'd sing for that choir loft. And you'd hear the reverberation change, the whole character of the voice. And you'd hear him laugh as he sang the next verse. He was happy with that sanctified sound. I couldn't build a wooden church. But in my garage, I had a 1964 AKG stereo steel spring reverb. Now, what this is just a big black box. And inside it has a tapered piece of steel. Starts wide and gets very narrow, and they wind it in a sort of spiral. And it's very loosely held in this box. And there's two of them, because it's stereo. And they have a little membrane between them. And sometimes you can run it mono. You feed the same signal into both springs. Sometimes stereo, slightly different into each spring. But you just ran whatever you were recording or whatever you were playing back into that steel spring, and you let it ring. And that's that beautiful late 50s up through mid-60s reverb. Oh, like on Rebel Yell, where it just goes forever. That's how they got it, was in big pieces of steel. So that's the closest I could get. I hooked up my steel spring reverb and I set it on 2.5 seconds sustain. It went on and on and on. And I made it dark. I turned up more bass and turned down treble to where I thought it sounded like the Chess Studios, as close as I could get it with modern equipment. Well, modern-ish equipment. Well, he came in, and I got to understand, he had bad hips at this point. So he sat in a big old Barcalounger recliner, you know? And he had his Fender Twin on the milk crate next to him. And he took that big old Les Paul concert size, and he boom, 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 boom. Next time he sang it, boom, 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 boom. And then he just played a little, and he stopped. And he got this big smile. And he said, "Now that sounds like the blues." And the guys from Blind Pig damn near fainted. They'd had him at every $1 million multi-fancy studio, and in this wooden garage that I'd put some Sonex up in one corner of and some wood up in another, and I'd organized where things went, and it sounded like the blues. And the last 7 years of his life, that's where he recorded. In his daughter's garage, in the studio I helped design to sound like the blues. He couldn't give me numbers. But I could listen, and I could hear those smiles. And I made the old man happy the last years of his life, I did. Sometimes it isn't the newest and best equipment. Sometimes it isn't the fanciest digital thing. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's hearing the smile, analyzing what that sound is. What are the characteristics of the sound? How long a sustain was that? How hard did he hit it? Was it bass or treble heavy? And then duplicating that parameter in a funky garage in Oakland to make one of the finest blues players of all time, Mr. John Lee Hooker, happy in his daughter's garage. And that is how I figured out John Lee Hooker's home studio. I'm Mary Mason from Connections House. These are my road stories. I hope you're enjoying them.